All right. Kevin, David, Steve, Jim, thank you very much for joining us today. Great to see you all.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Mark.
Steve, let's start with you because in addition to providing essential services, you're also an employer. And so you're looking out for the community and you're also looking out for your team. So can you give us a sense of how you're juggling that and how it's going at the City of Ottawa?
No, thank you, Mark. This has been a very different emergency response to what we've dealt with before. As you know, the City of Ottawa has been involved in ice storms and terrorist attacks and floods and tornadoes and train crashes and bus crashes. We've been involved in a lot of things, and the difference here is that normally all those other things, there's kind of a clear line of sight of what the endpoint's going to be able to anticipate what we need to do as a city and as an organization, as an employer. And on this one here, as it's evolving, it's really hard to kind of get a sense of where we're going to be a month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now. And I think we're all grappling with that. And as an organization delivering, essential services to the community, and it's intertwined as an employer, one of the first things we had to look at was how do we maintain our staffing and our people to be able to deliver those services, and what do we need to do to protect them and to protect the residents that come in contact with them. And so we quickly had to isolate and identify what were the critical services that we had to maintain no matter what, and what do we have to do to make sure people can get there every day. And obviously things like water, people don't think about that because we take these things for granted, but maintaining our water plants, the 2 main water plants, we have our critical infrastructure that have specialists that we have to keep that going. Our wastewater, our toilets have to flush or we're in big trouble. People can't work from home. Paramedics, fire, there's a number of our social services for vulnerable people. There are a number of services, long-term care centers that have to run no matter what. And so as an employer, our first thing was which people need to come to work and actually have to physically be at work. And what do we have to do to protect them? And that's where we moved very quickly in the first week to get them protected. And now we're the same as everybody else. We have a number of employees, or most of our employees, working from home and trying to figure out how do we transition to whatever people are referring to as the new normal is. What does that look like? And that's what we're in the process of doing right now.
At the same time, you've got to make sure you protect your employees and look after them, right? And that's not necessarily a dynamic that exists in other times of crisis when your team is serving people, but not also having to be protected themselves. So tell me about the challenge that's created.
Well, the issue that's before us right now is the whole personal protective equipment issue, which there's a shortage everywhere. We were at a point where we only had 4 or 5 days of equipment left for our paramedics. We were able to source some equipment. The issues we're having right now are our staff who are dealing with people in shelters, childcare staff, long-term care staff, our paramedics, people that are in the front lines, bylaw officers, fire, police, obviously. These people are dealing with and interacting with people every day, and we're trying to ensure that they have the right equipment and protective gear every day to protect them. So the mental health is another big issue that we've been aware of right from the beginning. We're very worried about not the immediate needs. Some people are struggling, but long term, as we progress into this, we're seeing signs because we're seeing an uptake in our employee assistance program. People are accessing those services. They're struggling, not because of the work so much, but all the things they're trying to deal with, being at home, their lives disrupted. They could have spouses that are out of work. They have parents, children who are affected. There's all kinds of situations that we're hearing about. And so we've been putting out a lot of information, and we've been taking concrete steps to make sure that our employees have the right protective equipment to be able to do their jobs when they come to work. The question is, how do we get everyone else back to work ultimately as we start opening up the economy? Because we don't have enough personal protective equipment for all of our employees and all of society. And I think that's going to be a big stumbling block as we open up our economy.
All right, Kevin, let's turn to you. Tell me a little bit about how you're managing your team and how you're protecting your employees and at the same time achieving productivity in this unusual circumstance.
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of the similar data points that Steve talked about, when we first looked at this, clearly looking at those that could work mobile, and then those that are, we run manufacturing facilities in Saskatoon, Regina, in Germany. So taking each case by case and literally contract by contract, because it's not just our staff that work in our corporate office. We have staff, thousands of people across the country working at customer sites. So that brought a whole new dynamic to this, is that we had to ensure that areas that we don't control, i.e. our customer sites, we had to work with our customers to make sure that we had provisions in place for health and safety, ideally working from home where available. So it's been a real team effort for us to really, from the ground up, look at every contract, look at every site, look at all of our staff, either essential, non-essential, put in work from home provisions for those that can work from home, and then literally monitor daily. I'm on a 10 o'clock call every day, updating the situation with regard to what has changed, either our physical locations or our virtual organization. And I use that word on purpose, the virtual organization, because now we are literally running probably 60–70% of Calian now is virtual. And so that's creating an interesting dynamic. So keeping people safe has been a priority. Keeping operations running has been our second priority with our customers. And then basically recovery would be our third. And I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point today. So it's really been a ground up effort. The team's done a great job, but it's taken a lot of focus and a lot of effort to ensure that we can continue to run our operations safely, Mark.
David, how about you? Because you have a smaller organization and one that I think was already in some ways operating a little more virtually and has the flexibility to do that because of the work that you do. So how has this changed your relationship with your employees? How are you managing them? And what lessons have arisen from this for you?
Yeah, as you said, we're a small team, seven team members spread out between Ottawa and Toronto. So we're not big by any means, but one of the things that I think has been easier for us is, as you said, we were already doing a lot of virtual work, a lot of flexible work environment where team members really had the choice to come into the office or not, and had a culture that I think made the transition to 100% remote or virtual workplace easier. I don't necessarily think it's easy, but easier. I do think we miss that physical component. We're in the consulting business, and so the ability to meet with clients, the ability to meet and brainstorm together is really important. And so finding ways to create those opportunities to collaborate and get together has been even more important. And so for me, the focus has been on the less of security, because we don't have to physically interact with customers or each other, but more on the mental and emotional side, that a number of my team members have struggled with the idea that they're stuck at home all day, and so it's being there to support them, being there to empathize. And I've learned some lessons in that, in recognizing that everybody is certainly very different. And so for me, that's been one of the initial challenges. I think for us now, we've entered a phase where it does feel a little bit more like a new normal. I think every day is getting a little easier. And so for me, it's making sure we don't lose those touch points, that we don't lose those opportunities to collaborate. And because eventually I'd like us to get back to where we were. And so the more we do this kind of work, I think the harder it is to go back. And so it's always trying to find ways of creating new stimulus, new experiences for the team that isn't the same Zoom call, isn't the same conference call, but other ways for us to just connect. So as an example, we have 3 companies that are that work together in consulting, government relations, market research, and communications, and we actually came together and we did a virtual happy hour together. Those who felt comfortable having a drink did, those who didn't, but it was really the first time in 4 weeks that all 25 of us got together, and it was a nice half an hour for us just to chat. So those kinds of more social events that aren't happening normally in our life, work can be a place where that can happen, and it's been effective for us.
Jim, what are you observing as a CEO of Stratford Managers, but also through the network of Stratford clients? Obviously there are companies at every point in the spectrum, from just doing whatever they can to keep their heads above water to planning for the future. But do you sense that there is at least a shift that's going on, that people that a lot of companies are stabilized and starting to turn their minds to recovery?
Yes, I would say that that's accurate. We kind of look at the progression of this pandemic, at least from a business context, as having gone through a couple of stages already. The first one being just reacting. And this is what we've heard from the other panelists. Initially, you're just there to protect your people, protect your business, figure out what you need to do to ensure your short-term and longer-term survival as a business. But then as we sort of find ourselves in the new normal, then what we're trying to figure out is how do we ensure that we're able to stay in this new normal phase, to stabilize in this phase for whatever the extended period of time will be that we're in this phase for a couple of months. And David's comments about, for example, using video conferencing to socialize, to maintain the social and cultural fabric of the companies is a great example of an activity in that stabilization phase. But to your point, Mark, I'm also seeing a lot of companies now starting to think about how they take advantage of this crisis. How do they come out of this stronger than they had been going into it? And I'm seeing companies beginning to develop and think about pretty creative and innovative ways of restructuring their business operations, or rethinking the core of their business with a view to increasing their differentiation or increasing their value proposition to their customers.
Kevin, are you starting to think like that? And are you imagining a future after the coronavirus crisis and what that might look like for Calian and how it might be different from the company you had in the past?
I think so. I think any business leader I'm talking to right now, I think we're all going through that assessment on a few fronts. Number one is just how you're organized as a company. The physical real estate element. We've been working a combination of virtual and home, but as you go down to week 5 or 6 of this, and you recognize that we can still run a multi-million-dollar company globally from my home office. It's comforting, because I'm not sure I had that confidence going into this, frankly. Secondly is that when you think about our customers and how they're going to react to this, we have a large healthcare practice, for example. So virtual healthcare versus physical healthcare that we've seen in the past, that's definitely, we're going to see that. We're doing some of that right now in our mental health practice. And then we go into our manufacturing with our supply chains. I just came off a call talking about global trends and how China is reacting now as they come back online. And this whole question around supply chain and globalization, or deglobalization was the term that was used in it. I think that's going to be interesting for us leaders to navigate, because I do believe we're going to see some of that. We're going to start seeing supply chains getting more options with regard to where you're sourcing, for sure, from a continuity perspective. And things we took for granted literally 2-3 months ago, I think are going to be really challenged. So I think across all elements, how our employees are going to work, how we're going to interface with our customers. We're also a publicly traded company, so how do I interact with my shareholders even? I think all of this is on the table, and I'd love to tell you I have it all figured out, but we're literally trying to debrief on this daily to come out of this stronger than ever.
Steve, I'm really interested to hear your observations because I know that to a large extent in the early part of this crisis, we've been talking about that some future undetermined day when we are going to restart the economy and that sort of thing. But obviously, it's not going to be the flip of a switch. There's going to be there are going to be stages, and there's going to be a period that doesn't look like what we have now, but also doesn't look like the ultimate destination either. There's going to be kind of probably a fairly long interim period, and that has all kinds of implications, obviously, for the city of Ottawa around things like public transit and other services that you deliver. So tell us a little bit about what you're envisioning in the future based on the best information you have so far.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. Right now we're engaged with federal government. We're speaking to senior deputy ministers across all departments. And there's 6 cities that have come together across Canada Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and we're working with the federal government to share with them our views in how the economy might be able to open up and what supports we need locally, financially and socially to be able to do that. We're also doing work with those 6 cities with a consulting company looking at each sector in our local economies and on an aggregate whole to understand just what the damage has been to those various sectors. And we brought the healthcare and social sector into that. So we're creating a virtual hub for large cities to be able to understand with data what is happening on the ground to the various sectors. And that's going to feed into our discussion right now. We have a task team that we set up. We've set up 5 task teams. One of them is a recovery task team, which is going to basically working with public health and our various intergovernmental partners to look at what makes sense to open up first so that we maintain social distancing. We don't end up back into a peak curve again. And so the early thinking is that there are a number of industries that could open up sooner than others, and particularly those where, like Kevin and David and Jim talked about, they're already doing virtual work to a large extent. So we could start supporting those organizations. The ones that are going to be the toughest at the other end of the extreme are retail, restaurants, entertainment, where large gatherings are still happening. The issue really is going to be on what is the tolerance for how many people can come together, and what is the protection that we're going to be asking not only our own employees to be taking, but employees in the private sector and nonprofit sector to be taken so that they can actually interact with clients. And right now, as I said, the PPE issue is huge because the supply of personal protective equipment for some sectors in the economy are going to be critical for them to be able to function in some way, to be able to receive customers with a larger group. And so we are hoping, we're working hand in hand, obviously, because the province will set that initial tone and reopening, but we are working very closely with the federal government and provincial government to give our local input into terms of what we're prepared to support and what makes sense in Ottawa. Ottawa is very different from the other 5 cities I mentioned, in that 21% of our economy is in some kind of public administration between federal government, the city, universities, and hospitals. So we have a core foundation in our economy where people are still receiving, bi-weekly salaries. For us, we have to be thoughtful because we don't want to get back to a worse situation than we're in right now. But I think that we can do it in a very measured, thoughtful way and still be able to protect the population.
David, obviously an element of this is what the government tells us we're allowed to do, but then there's another side to it, which I know you've been monitoring closely, which is the mindset of Canadians on what they're willing to do. And I know you've been looking at that. Are people going to want to get on buses and trains and go to movie theaters and go to the gym and those kinds of things? Or are they going to be fearful of that because of the continuing risk of infection?
And I think that question is what we're really unsure about still, right? But it's that gap between what we're allowed to do and what we're comfortable doing that is the most important one to figure out, depending on what business you're in. And so, I'm in the business of trying to help organizations figure that out, and it's different across the board. What are you willing to do to get on a plane versus on a bus versus sit in an arena and watch a hockey game is going to be very different, and it's very different depending on your level of concern, your age. There's so many factors. And so, I look at what Steve's trying to do and figure out, and certainly it's not an easy task because there's no one size that's going to fit all. And you're dealing with public perceptions at the same time, and you're seeing what's going on in other jurisdictions where you have a pushback of some of these constraints. And so I think as a business leader, my advice is to learn about your customers, this is the moment when you actually should be doing it. And it's not just a plug for my own business, but it's important to, and I'm doing with my own clients, right, to understand what they need, what I can help with, and what is the elasticity of their concern versus their demand to get out and experience the world again. And I think as we get closer, Jim described this reaction phase that I now think we've passed. Now we're in the coping phase. We're just, as consumers, we're just trying to cope with this new world. But I do think we're going to come to a point that our desire to get out of the house is going to come in conflict with our fear of getting the virus, and that's not going to go away until a vaccine comes along. And so that new normal won't be the normal; it will be the interim normal until the vaccine comes. And there's lots of ways we can try to figure it out, but there's no perfect prediction because people are really unpredictable to begin with, and in a pandemic, it's all bets are off.
Yeah. Jim, what are you seeing in terms of how people are planning for these various phases? Because there is so much uncertainty, you wonder if it's even possible to envision your business in the next phase or the one after that and start to plan accordingly, or configure offerings, or even do modeling of any kind, because there are so many elements of it that are undetermined.
Yeah, and we're very uncomfortable as human beings with uncertainty. As a business person myself, I find it stressful not knowing what the future is going to look like, or even being able to predict what the future is going to look like. Not only is it hard to determine how people are going to react in their own individual choices, it's hard to estimate how economies are going to react, how the supply chains are going to change, what the business environment is going to look like. Are we going to see a V-shaped recovery? Is it a W, a bounce? Is it going to be a long recovery? I don't think anybody knows the answers to those questions. And so what I'm seeing is businesses are effectively doing agile business planning. And what that often looks like is companies will develop scenarios that have maybe reflect those different types of recovery that we might experience in the economy. And they're trying to identify the trigger points that would suggest that one scenario is more likely than another scenario. Most companies are also trying to build guardrails. In other words, the scenarios at the worst case and the best case of their estimation, and ensure that in the worst case scenario, the company has sufficient resources, cash in particular, to be able to get through the coping stage and get to the ultimate recovery of the economy. One of the things that I think is really important, and David alluded to this, or actually mentioned this in his comments, is continuous engagement with customers and with the supply chain, because there's no way of knowing what the future is going to look like without actually engaging with the future as it emerges.
Great point. Kevin, have you started to turn your mind to opportunities? Is it, because I know there are some businesses that are saying, okay, look, I'm going to emerge from this stronger than before, and maybe with a different set of services or products that I'm offering future clients. Is this a time when a company can uncover a new opportunity?
I believe so, and I think you've got to look at it through two lenses. Number one is just the continued growth posture of your company, and number two, almost surviving this newer interim world will be. Calian, we've got healthcare, so clearly just we have quite a bit of demand in our healthcare business right now. We have emergency management as well, so we do simulation of exercises. We simulate tornadoes hitting nuclear reactors, and this whole simulation element of pandemics with regard to now, most business continuity plans had the threat of a pandemic, but I don't think anyone took it as seriously as what we're seeing, frankly, is in the world right now. I think everyone was more probably worried about natural disasters, floods, fires, terrorist activities, those type of things. So on our emergency management side, we expect that to grow as well. And then our manufacturing, we do a lot of telecommunications. So I think the whole demand on capacity, virtual organizations, is going to increase. So for us specifically, we see lots of opportunities. That being said, you got to be smart on how you reply to it and how you get organized around it. And as well, you also got to think about a defensive posture with regard to maybe some things you're doing today that may be challenged, frankly, going forward on the business model that you're operating today. So I think you got to look at it through two lenses: a defensive and an offensive posture.
David, how about you? Do you see the potential for new opportunities emerging from this crisis?
Absolutely. I think you have to, first of all. I think, as much as this is a difficult moment, you have to, and I've tried to do that myself in way of my own coping, is to look at the opportunities, read as much as I can. I guess being in this business that I'm in, market research, I'm always learning about different sectors already. So I have that that luxury of being able not just to focus solely on my own business. But I do think that, you know, with this challenge, you're already seeing it in so many different sectors, right? You're seeing, I look at food service as an example, one of the hardest hit sectors right now, and you're already seeing really innovative ideas come out that they may never have thought that, hey, I can, a local business here in Ottawa, Stofa, the other day, I got their takeout, and it came all like I'm a foodie, so I love like those tasting menus, and it basically allowed me to be a chef for a day with my wife, and they were able to probably pay the rent this week because they were able to sell out, right? So I do see lots of opportunities. I think the biggest challenge is getting through this moment and recognizing that is finding the motivation to focus actually on that next opportunity. But I do think it's there, and again, I can speak to my own business and say, well, you know, I feel really optimistic because we are going into such an uncertain, different world that you're going to need research, I hope, to figure all that out. But that's not going to be the case, I think, in a lot of other businesses' natural inclination, but those opportunities are there. And while the financial impact on most customers is going to be real, if we look at past big events coming out of World War I and the Spanish flu, World War II, these were moments where you had massive expansion, massive innovation, massive opportunity. And if you're already in a strong position coming into this, I do think there's a lot of advantages coming out.
Want to ask you each to give your thoughts on what you think the world is going to look like when we do emerge from this once and for all. I think this has become a bit of a parlor game where people offer their views on, oh, the world will never be the same, everything's changed fundamentally, and other people saying, actually, a lot of things are going to go back to normal. We've certainly been in situations before where in the middle of a crisis like September 11th, we forecast dramatic changes that didn't end up happening. People still were willing to rent office space in tall buildings, and the airline industry did recover from that. I'm curious to hear what you each have to say about that. Steve, do you think we are going to emerge from this a fundamentally changed world, or will a lot of things go back to normal?
You know, I like that, Mark, you referred to as a parlor game because, you know, we've been having a lot of discussion internally and with our colleagues across the country about what might it look like. I'm of the view, and I go back to what David said, you know, we've had several world wars, and we've had some tragedies in our history, and things have leaped forward in many respects in some dimensions, but some things stay the same. And I just can't imagine that despite this pandemic and how bad it seems right now, that once we pass this, and hopefully there's a vaccine, that people don't go back to what I think people need to do, and that's social connection. I think social connection is something you're never going to be able to take away from human beings. I'm also hearing from, you know, at first we thought when we were in the recovery mode that we were speculating that, you know, we can get rid of, the city has 700 buildings, we can get rid of a lot of our buildings and save all these costs, but I just don't believe that. I think that people will still gravitate to our recreation centers and our arenas and everything else once they feel safe. I think David hit it right on. I think it's whatever the government does in terms of reopening it is only going to be determined by a function of how comfortable people feel to actually participate in society again. And so, you know, when I look ahead, I think people will still go to football games eventually. They will still go to hockey games. I don't think that's going to stop. The issue is going to be that I was reading a thing on, I was watching something on Bill Gates recently, and I know he's been the subject of a lot of crazies lately, but Bill Gates was talking about the key word is flexibility, and I think that that flexibility in our workforce is going to be critical. I think I'm hearing from a lot of our staff who always used to say, I wish you'd equip me so I can work from home. And I'm not getting that so much anymore. I think people are saying, I like to work from home every once in a while, but not every day, because I miss being with the team and having the jokes and the fun and the laughs and all the other things that they like to do when they come to work. So I think that that the panel is right. I think we're going to see some things leap ahead, and I think we're going to see a new way in creativity and innovation in a lot of sectors because they have to. But I think a lot of things are going to be the same once people feel safe enough to participate in social interaction again.
Jim, what do you think?
I think we tend to underestimate how much things will change in the short term. in the long term. We overestimate how much things will change in the short term. So I actually think a lot of things will go back to the old normal, but I think there will be some things that will change dramatically. One example of that is video conferencing. So many people now have become familiar with video conferencing and are relying on it on a day-to-day basis. I think that will not go back to the way it was, because we've got a new skill set that we've developed as a society, effectively as individuals. And I think we're going to use that skill set. And I also think that it's going to create opportunities for innovation in how our video conferencing systems provide us a different experience. I'll give you a quick example of that, going back to your question about innovation. If you go to a dinner, you'll notice that if there's 8 people at the table, you might have one person speaking for a while, and the person will change as the dinner conversation goes around. But then the group will break into maybe 3 or 4 different groups where you have simultaneous conversations. Our video conferencing systems currently don't allow for that. There's got to be a way to do that. I don't know what it is, but there's a great example of an innovation that will come about as a result of people's receptivity to change. So I do think there will be a lot of innovation driven by necessity, as we've talked about. I also think that in this period that we're experiencing now, there's a lot of openness and willingness to try new things, which creates an environment that will allow for change. So I think there will be significant change, but I don't think it's going to happen in quite the way that you might, you know, if you think, oh, I'm hunkered down in my house, everything in the world is going to change when I come out. I don't think so. I think parts of our society will change, though.
Okay, Kevin, what do you expect?
Well, I think the key data point, I think what Jim and Steve has alluded to is, and Dave, is just the context of when we feel safe again. And I don't know, to be honest with you, if that's 12, 18 months. I think that's either going to be through whether development of vaccine or just the immunity reality that as more people get exposed to it, we start building up a natural immunity as humankind. But I think that one is one that I'm still debating. If there's a second wave of this in November, if there's like a cold and flu season, if this just happens again, if this starts up again, November, December, just imagine, you know, what we've been through the last couple of months. And what happens if we're at the front end of it this time? You know, we've had the back end. We saw what happened in China, but I don't think that's going to happen next time. I think it's going to hit the world at the same time because everyone's been exposed to it. So in the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to have to be very flexible, very nimble, definitely hunkering down on lessons learned coming out of this with regard to, you know, fixing those areas we thought we could do better. So I think there's a short-term element to this, and I don't think that ends until the world feels safe. And I'm not sure when that is, and I think we got to be ready as business leaders. It may not be as fast as we think that's coming. And then after that, you know, I find as humans we have a short memory, and we get back to kind of old habits. I think we're all hoping that we do learn from this. You know, you see the pictures around the world of people being able to see mountains for the first time in, you know, tens of years because of the smog. And I just hope that there's some lessons learned as humankind we take away from this, whether it's the environmental impact, how we operate, how do we interface with our environment, and then as business leaders, how do we actually inject that into our thought process? Because I do worry that it just does go back to normal. And I think there's some huge opportunities for some lessons learned here. So short term, let's get to safe, whatever that is. Long term, definitely trying to build in some of the opportunities into your business model, but also hopefully inject some learnings into how we operate longer term.
Okay, David, what do you think? How much is the world going to change?
Yeah, I look at it, I have a lens or a framework that I try to anticipate. The first is human instincts and nature is human instincts and nature, and to change that is a massive undertaking. But I do think that this event will accelerate a lot of the trends we had already been seeing. We had been seeing a shift to being home-based on a lot of things. If you look at some consumer behavior and how we entertain ourselves, you know, this is formalized hunkering down at home, but we had been hunkering down more and more at home. And now that we've been working for, if you can, a lot of us, I think that's going to be something to watch. I think we already talked about flexibility at work, flexibility in how we do things. That's going to probably become more of a normal going forward. But in my mind, and Kevin, you mentioned, you know, old habits die hard. The longer this goes on, the more new habits will form, right? If they say that in 21 days you can develop new habits, I think that's what makes this moment unique in history, is how long some of the things we no longer do, we won't be doing anymore. And if you are somebody who typically went to the gym every morning and worked out, and now have been doing it for 6 weeks from your home basement or your home gym, there's a chance, and if I'm Good Life Fitness or I'm Greco, I worry that you no longer need to go to the physical gym. Even if you'd rather be with other people, you've just got used to it, right? There comes a level of comfort that comes with doing something over and over again. So I do think some things will change. I think the need for human interaction, for physical interaction, won't. I think that, I do a lot of work with younger generations. And so I look at millennials, for example, and say, they were probably the best prepared for this because most of their life was already digital. But on the other side, when we look at our data, they're the most lonely right now. They're the most who say, I am craving going back to a restaurant. I am craving going to a bar to see a live concert. And so I come back to where Kevin ended to say, in the short term, it's going to be about comfort. It's going to be about how we're ready to do it. There will be some significant changes, but at the end of the day, the market will move in a direction, and I think businesses will react to whatever that new normal is. And at the end of the day, the goal is to delight your customer, and I think that's not going to change at all.
I think that's a great point about the prolonged nature of this, because this isn't like a power outage that lasts 2 or 3 days, where in the middle of it, people might make promises that, oh, we're gonna spend more time together or have more more board game nights or that kind of thing, and then you just go back to normal. There are new patterns of behavior that will emerge from this, for sure. So, any final thoughts on anything that we haven't covered already? Does anybody want to add anything else to this, Steve?
No, the only thing I'd say is that, for the panel here, I think has reflected a really interesting perspective in terms of business, and obviously I represent government. And the thing that struck me most about this is that just how people have come together in terms of a mindset, in terms of their thinking. I don't think I've ever experienced in my lifetime a point where thinking has converged so quickly, where people are so informed about what's happening and speculating about what may happen to the future, just the time that people have to think about it. And I think it's a good thing because people are really motivated. Certainly in our workplace, I'm seeing a level of motivation and focus that I've never seen before in all the crises and emergencies I've ever been involved in. People, I think, believe that this is fundamentally different than any other emergency or crisis we've been in as a community. And they're very focused on what that might look like. And so we have people's attention. So I think there is opportunity in that for sure.
Jim, some final thoughts?
Rather than looking out in time, I'll make one comment about what we're experiencing right now. And this was a question that a friend of mine put to me, a good friend of mine. He said, Jim, what are you going to regret not having done during this period when you look back on it from a few months out? And that was a very stimulating question, and it made me think about the kinds of habits that I want to be developing now and the sorts of things that I want to do today in the environment that I find myself, at home with my family, connecting with my friends over video conferencing, and dealing with a business crisis that does create, and a societal crisis that does create opportunities. What do I want to do now that if I don't do it, I'll regret not having done it a few months from now?
Great question. David?
Well, I think for me, it's, having a lot more time to read and to go back and think about these past moments. Can't help but feel those moments of renaissance come out of the worst moments. And so I'm going to look a little farther and say, but make it in the short term to say, what are the things that I can do today, sitting at my kitchen table, talking to my team through this computer, that's going to enable us to do some amazing things that are actually going to help us solve the bigger, longer term problems that we're going to face, right? No one's talking about climate change anymore, but we're still going to have to solve that. And I do think that this will be a moment where all this energy, as Steve referred to, us focusing on a problem, maybe gets us used to coming together to solve a problem together. And climate change is one example that I hope, after this, once this is all settled and we've recovered, that could be an example that we focus on. So I'll always be thinking about how does my business and how does my own professional time position me to be able to help contribute to that, and at the same time achieve the other goals that I have for myself and my business.
All right, Kevin, last word to you.
Yeah, I think number one, just want to thanks Stratford for being part of the forum and having an opportunity to hear from other leaders, because I learn every time I'm on one of these. As Steve mentioned, the willingness for everyone just to get on a call and just talk about their experience. I've never seen anything like that in my life, to your point, Steve. So I think there is some benefit to that, and hopefully something we can continue. I think for me, there's really two elements I think about. There's a personal element to this thing as Kevin Ford, a human being. I have my family here. I have, I've got parents. I've got people that I'm just trying to deal with, and as everyone is, and through that. And then second, Kevin Ford is CEO of Calian, and that to me, I would say the biggest reflection I've had on this, you can have the best plan in the world, but when your staff just rise to that challenge, I would just, it's always amazing to me what I can throw at somebody, and whether I initiate it or not, it's just a reminder to me, our best business continuity plan is our people. And our people are rising to the challenge, whether it's in healthcare or learning or technology. They're doing things that I'm blown away with every day. So it's a reminder to me that, that team, when challenged, just continues to rise. And I'm so proud of that. So it's something I need to reflect on, and how do I continue to engage this team? I've never been more visible as a leader. I would say I'm doing video calls, I'm doing video, blog posts, the whole kit, trying to keep everyone up to date. And how do I keep communicating past this to keep that team motivated? Because man, I'm seeing some pretty incredible things coming out of this company. Not that I hadn't before, frankly, but it's a reminder, challenge your team, and they will rise to that challenge.
Great point. And isn't it remarkable just how resilient human beings are, and teams are, and government and business are during a time like this? Because if a year ago somebody had come to us, all of us, and said, here's what is going to happen in March and April of 2020, when I talk to people now, I realize that there are some people who are struggling and suffering and going through very, very difficult times, but a lot of the people I talk to are maintaining a level of buoyancy and optimism and focus through this. And I'm not sure we all would have forecast that if you described the scope of this situation to us a year ago. So it is remarkable to see how people are responding so well to this in most cases. Kevin, Jim, David, Steve, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.